This is A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's go through the main headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump says negotiators should take their time in talks with Iran, insisting Washington will not rush an agreement. Russia launched one of its largest aerial attacks on Kiev since the start of the war, killing at least 4 people and injuring nearly 100. And World Health Organization reports more than 900 suspected Ebola cases in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, including 101 confirmed infections. U.S. President Donald Trump says negotiators should take their time in talks with Iran, insisting Washington will not rush an agreement. He says discussions are continuing with key issues still to be resolved.
250 years, but that I'm not going to get away with.
U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington is in no hurry to finalize a nuclear agreement with Iran, insisting that time is on our side as negotiations continue amid rising tensions in the Middle East. In a Truth Social post, Trump said the U.S. blockade on Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz would remain in full force until an agreement is reached, certified and signed. He also reiterated that Iran would not be allowed to develop or acquire a nuclear weapon. However, Trump said negotiations are continuing in what he described as an orderly and constructive manner. His comments come just one day after he suggested that a potential peace agreement with Iran had been largely negotiated and could eventually lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. According to a senior U.S. official, an immediate deal is unlikely, with key details still under discussion. The official says Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has approved the broad framework of the agreement, although the outcome remains uncertain. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran is prepared to reassure the international community that it is not seeking nuclear weapons, but he also stressed that Iran would never compromise on its honor and dignity. At the same time, Iran's Tasnim news agency denied reports claiming Tehran had agreed to halt nuclear activities for 20 years or remove nuclear materials from the country. Still, major disagreements remain over sanctions relief, frozen Iranian oil revenues, Tehran's nuclear ambitions, and regional conflicts involving Iran-backed groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, said he and Trump agree that any final agreement with Iran must eliminate the nuclear threat posed by Tehran. Netanyahu also said Trump reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself against threats across the region, including Lebanon. Turning to global markets, oil prices fell sharply amid uncertainty surrounding the talks. Brent crude dropped more than 4% to below $99 a barrel, while U.S. crude also declined by more than 4%. Iran's Revolutionary Guards say only 33 vessels passed through the Strait of Hormuz in the past 24 hours after receiving permission from Tehran, far below the roughly 140 ships that typically cross daily before the conflict. Analysts say that while any agreement could help reinforce the fragile ceasefire and ease pressure on global markets, disruptions to energy supplies may continue well into 2027, keeping fuel and food prices elevated worldwide.
Oil markets started the week lower as renewed optimism over U.S. Iran diplomacy eased concerns about supply risks through a key global shipping route, with traders reacting to signals of possible progress despite continued uncertainty over a deal.
Oil prices fell around 6% to two-week lows on Monday as optimism grew that the United States and Iran were moving closer to a possible understanding that could reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Brent crude futures dropped $5.85 or 5.7% to $97.69 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate fell $5.75 or 6% to $90.85. Both benchmarks hit their lowest levels since May 7th earlier in the session. On Saturday, U.S. President Donald Trump said Washington and Iran had largely negotiated an understanding aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a critical route that previously carried around 1/5 of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments. Analysts say the comments have raised hopes of near-term relief for markets, though they caution that significant risks and unresolved issues remain around any potential agreement. However, there is also caution in the market, with Trump later urging negotiators not to rush a deal and analysts noting that talks have broken down in the past, leaving traders wary of overreacting. It is also expected that a full return to normal oil flows through the strait would take months, as damaged energy infrastructure is repaired. In the United States, energy firms added oil and gas rigs for a fifth consecutive week. The rig count rose by 7 to 558, its highest since June 2025, although still down 8 rigs, or about 1% from a year earlier. Analysts say the data suggests tentative stabilization after last week's sell-off, but overall market conviction remains weak.
Russia launched one of its largest aerial assaults on Kiev since the start of the war on Sunday. The barrage killed at least 4 people and wounded nearly 100 others. Hours later, Ukraine reportedly struck a major Russian oil pumping facility supplying the Moscow region.
Russia's hours-long overnight barrage killed 4 people in Kyiv and 2 more in the surrounding area, and it wounded nearly 100, according to Ukrainian officials. Authorities said dozens of residential buildings and several schools had been damaged, many in the center of Kyiv. Ukrainian President Zelensky, who on Sunday visited a number of damaged buildings in Kyiv, said Russia had also targeted water supply facilities, saying Moscow wanted to damage them before the summer increased demand. In total, the Air Force said Russia launched 90 missiles and 600 drones. Moscow said it used Oreshnik, Iskander, Kinzhal and Zircon missiles in retaliation for what it described as Ukrainian strikes on civilian targets inside Russia. Kyiv denies targeting civilians. Russia's defense ministry said the strikes were aimed at Ukrainian military command facilities, including sites used by ground forces and military intelligence, as well as air bases and military-industrial infrastructure. European leaders condemned the Kyiv attack, with Britain and Germany describing the use of the Oreshnik, an intermediate-range missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads, as an escalation. Meanwhile, following the strikes on Kyiv and the surrounding region, Ukraine reportedly targeted a major Russian oil pumping station supplying the Moscow region. The Votorovo facility, part of Russia's state-owned pipeline network, also supplies fuel to major Russian airports.
Protesters have taken to the streets of Madrid, demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez over corruption allegations linked to his political circle. The demonstrations, which also spread tensions to other Spanish cities, have prompted investigations and drawn reactions from across the political spectrum.
Thousands of people marched through Spain's capital Madrid on Sunday to protest soaring rents, rising home prices and a worsening housing shortage. The demonstration was organised by the Madrid Tenants Union and backed by Spain's 2 largest trade unions. Organisers claimed more than 100,000 people joined the march, while authorities estimated the turnout at around 23,000. Protesters accused the government of moving too slowly to address the housing crisis.
I'm 87 years old. I live on my own. I don't have a family, and I have been living for 70 years in that house. A vulture fund bought it at the same price I would have been able to buy it, and in 2021 they took me to court because I have an old rental contract. They tried to evict me on October 2025, and they stopped it. Now they will try to evict me on June 3rd.
Spain's central bank says the number of new households has grown faster than new housing supply between 2021 and 2025, creating a shortage of about 700,000 homes. Eurostat data shows housing costs in Spain rose nearly 13% year on year. In response, the government has approved a €7 billion plan to expand public housing and support young renters and first-time buyers. However, a separate proposal to freeze rent increases failed to pass in Parliament. The housing protests come amid broader political tensions in Spain. On Saturday, Tens of thousands of people also marched in Madrid demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez following a series of corruption scandals. Officials say at least 7 police officers were injured after small clashes broke out when a group of protesters attempted to breach barriers surrounding the Prime Minister's residence. The protests come after a Spanish court opened a corruption investigation into former Prime Minister José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, who has denied any wrongdoing. Pressure on Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has also grown due to separate investigations involving his inner circle, including a case concerning his wife, Begoña Gómez. Sánchez has dismissed the allegations as politically motivated.
Serbian President Alexander Vučić on Sunday began a 5-day visit to China. While highlighting growing ties between Belgrade and Beijing, Vučić also told reporters he could resign soon as large anti-government demonstrations continue across Serbia.
Serbian President Alexander Vučić arrived in Beijing on Sunday for a state visit to China from May 24th to 28th, marking his first state visit to the country. According to Chinese media, Serbia is also the first European country to agree with China on building a community with a shared future for the new era. At the start of his visit, Vučić said he could resign soon. According to M1 TV, he stressed that he would not prematurely reduce his powers, as former Serbian President Boris Tadić had done. He said a president either resigns or remains in office until the end of the mandate. Vučić's remarks came as large anti-government protests continued in Belgrade, where thousands gathered in the city centre demanding political change in the latest wave of demonstrations against his rule. Despite tensions at home, Vučić received a warm welcome in China at the start of his 5-day visit, aimed at strengthening bilateral ties between Beijing and Belgrade. Upon arriving in Beijing, he visited the Great Wall, where he watched performances of traditional Serbian folk dances and songs.
This speaks a lot about Chinese people. This speaks a lot about your persistence, your desire to defend your country, your borders, your sovereignty, independence. But also it presents always the diligence and dedication of Chinese people, which I admire very much and very happy to be here for the first time.
Vučić is scheduled to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang to review bilateral relations and discuss international issues.
China has launched the Shenzhou 23 crewed spacecraft carrying 3 astronauts to the Tiangong space station, as Beijing pushes ahead with ambitions to become a leading global space power. One crew member is expected to remain in orbit for around a year as China expands its long-duration human space lift program. A-News correspondent Mahnur Maktoum in Beijing has more.
China has successfully launched the Shenzhou 23 crewed spacecraft, sending 3 astronauts to the Tiangong space station in the latest step forward for Beijing to rapidly advancing space program. The mission includes Hong Kong's first astronaut and will see 1 crew member remain in orbit for approximately 1 year as China expands its long-duration human spaceflight capabilities. The spacecraft lifted off from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwestern China aboard a Long March 2F carrier rocket. State media said that the crew will carry out a range of scientific experiments, maintenance operations, and technology tests aboard the Tiangong station during their stay in orbit. The mission is also expected to support medical and biological research linked to extended human habitation in space. The launch comes as China pushes ahead with ambitious long-term goals, including landing astronauts on the moon before 2030, developing lunar infrastructure, and expanding deep space exploration programs. Beijing has invested heavily in its space sector over the past decade, achieving milestones including lunar sample return missions, a Mars rover landing, and the construction of the Tiangong orbital station. The latest mission highlights China's determination to compete with the United States and other major powers in the increasingly strategic space sector. Manu Mukhtar, A News, Beijing.
The World Health Organization says more than 900 suspected Ebola cases, including 101 confirmed infections, have now been recorded in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Surveillance has been stepped up as the outbreak continues to spread, with officials warning that case numbers could still rise. The outbreak, linked to the rare Bundibugyo strain, has been declared a public health emergency of international concern, with no approved vaccine or specific treatment currently available. The outbreak has also been linked to more than 170 deaths, including 3 Red Cross volunteers who likely contracted the virus while handling bodies before it was identified. Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the U.S. Iran peace framework and Middle East tensions. Stay tuned. Welcome back to News. We continue with our top story for discussion. Tensions and diplomacy are moving in parallel across the Middle East as President Donald Trump signals that a potential U.S.-Iran peace framework is largely negotiated, while insisting final details are still being worked out. Reports suggest discussions include nuclear-related constraints, sanctions relief, and maritime security arrangements in the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, Washington is reiterating support for Israel's freedom of action against perceived regional threats, including Hezbollah positions in Lebanon, adding another layer of complexity to an already volatile landscape. Joining us from Madrid is political analyst Enrique Casero to help us unpack these fast-moving developments. Mr. Casero, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Mr. Casero, how significant is this claim that a U.S.-Iran agreement is largely negotiated, given the long history of stalled diplomacy? Do you see this as a genuine breakthrough or more of a political signal ahead of a further bargaining?
I think we have to be cautious with this announcements because we heard from lots and lots of time before this one. So yes. The only thing that can keep me in a more hopeful way in order to believe that this agreement can go to the next steps and can mean something for the peace in the Middle East and the opening of the Hormuz Strait is that Marco Rubio is taking a main role in the communication of the agreement. So, but anyway, we have to be very cautious because I don't think that everything is done already. We know that these agents, which are, of course, Iran and the United States, they got a very weak patience, if you want to call it that way. And I know that for sure Pakistan is trying to do all the middle work, but right now I think it's better to be cautious and see how the next 48 hours, 72 hours during the next days are evolving.
Mr. Casero, could sanctions relief and unfreezing of Iranian assets be enough for Tehran to make meaningful concessions?
Of course, sanctions is key in here. Of course, nuclear development or nuclear technologies to be stopped are key in here, and I think is for Iran is going to be a deal breaker. And that's the reason why I said before that all the lines that I see in the Iran-U.S. negotiations are weak. I mean, they're so fragile that because they're looking for things that are completely on the opposite of the way of thinking of each country, right? So sanctions could be release the sanctions is not going to be a thing for the United States because they want, and not because they want it, because Israel wants a weaker and weaker Iran. Sanctions are fundamental on that strategy. So, and we know for sure that Israel is now saying by by Netanyahu's and all the opposition. I mean, the whole country agrees with this. Is the work must be done, must be finished. So in this situation, sanctions are going to be crucial.
So how does Israel's freedom of action posture affect the viability of any U.S.-Iran understanding?
I think Israel is having they're having their own plans, and the strategy of Israel's strategy is completely I don't know. They have a huge ownership on that. I don't think that maybe the U.S. is not the United States is not they don't have just one concern, which is Iran. The other concern is not a small one. Is Israel, because as I said before, they want to finish the job. They want Iran to stop being a threat for the region, especially for the country. So if there is some sort of reminiscence of operativeness by Iran in order to restart or to make all this big deal over in the region, Israel wants to cut it and wants to cut it from the roots. So I don't think the only agent here to attend in order to reach a peace agreement, in order to reach a truce, has to be Iran. It has to be Israel as well. So if Israel is not if Israel doesn't agree with the accord or with the treaty, and everything is just going to be just words.
So, Mr. Casera, are we seeing a contradiction in Washington's approach? Diplomacy with Iran on one hand and military backing for Israel on the other?
I think there is no. I don't see that as a contradiction. We have to consider different points in here. One of them is, of course, China and the Chinese patients. That for more that we can praise the Chinese patients. Obviously, it has an end, and so there is some pressure from there. And the other is pressure from the United States that on their own arsenal. And by that I mean that all the Tomahawks and all the drones and all the, no matter how cheap they are, and the Tomahawks are not cheap at all, but all the arsenal that the United States is applying on the attacks over Iran is decreasing more and more their defenses capabilities, right? So I don't think that Iran got a huge, and I think it's a huge resilience, and they rather to say they're gonna die fighting the U.S. and fighting Israel than just giving up. So here right now, I think there is no contradiction. The United States at some point can keep on attacking. I don't think they're gonna do it in a grand scale way, but they can keep threatening with the attacks, and on the other side, just having the negotiations, because something is. I don't know what. I think an agreement is going to come before the completely emptiness of the U.S. arsenal. But we have to consider that the United States weaponry is not right now as I speak. So they have to balance these two situations.
So what role might regional actors like Saudi Arabia or Gulf states be playing behind the scenes on U.S.-Iran talks?
Of course, we are entering here again with the Shiite and the Sunni struggle between these two cultures and these two ways of understanding Islam. And I don't think that Saudi Arabia or the other Sunni countries are gonna, Sunni countries, sorry, are gonna say a word against the defeat of Iran. I think they're patiently waiting, in despite that some of their territories have been attacked by Iran, but they're patiently waiting for trying to, I don't want to say annihilation, because it's not going to be sort of that thing, but completely neutralization of the Iranian threat in the region. So I think they're supporting the U.S. Israel-U.S. alliance the more they can, and they're waiting for a resolution that can fulfill their expectations on the situation.
Enrique Casera, thank you very much for your insights and for joining us on the program. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News, and now we turn to our regional stories. Azerbaijan is preparing to host a major international energy gathering this June, bringing together key industry players, government officials and global experts. The event will feature a wide program of discussions, exhibitions and high-level meetings focused on energy cooperation and innovation.
Baku Energy Week will be hosted by Azerbaijan from the 1st to the 3rd of June. This year's event is expected to bring together international and local companies from 45 countries.
Under this year's programme, the main topics of discussion will include energy security, green energy, oil and gas projects, renewable energy sources, regional cooperation and investment opportunities. Baku Energy Forum will open for the first time at the Baku Expo Centre on June 1st. The forum's subsequent sessions will be held at the Baku Congress Centre.
The event will feature panel discussions, presentations, development sessions and document signing ceremonies. At the same time, the Trans-Logistica exhibition will be held, focusing on current issues in the region's transport and logistics sector.
Within the framework of this year's Baku Energy Week programme, a number of high-level events aimed at strengthening regional and international cooperation in the energy sector are planned. One of these events will be a meeting attended by ministers from D8 countries.
The state oil company of Azerbaijan is the main partner of this year's Baku Energy Week. The company's leadership will speak at the Forum on Energy Transition, Future Strategies and Regional Cooperation. The design of the SOCAR exhibition stand has also been developed around this concept. It will present information about the company's history, current activities and future plans. It will also highlight SOCAR's role in the energy sector, its international partnerships and its contribution to energy security. Baku Energy Forum is expected to bring together more than 700 participants and over 60 international speakers. The forum will discuss energy security, green energy, regional cooperation, digitalization, artificial intelligence and sustainable energy systems. The exhibition will showcase innovations in oil and gas field development, drilling technologies, pipelines, digital solutions, artificial intelligence and decarbonisation.
Officials and diplomats have gathered in Baku to mark Africa Day conference and discuss expanding ties between Azerbaijan and African countries. The talks are focusing on trade, investment and long-term strategic cooperation. Our correspondent Gulçin Kocaliba has more.
Azerbaijan's trade with African countries increased significantly, rising from $150 million in 2023 to $580 million in 2025, a trend reflecting growing economic potential between the two sides. The development was highlighted at the Africa Day conference in Baku under the theme Rising Continent, Emerging Partnerships. The event brought together diplomats, officials and experts to discuss strengthening Azerbaijan-Africa relations. Two panel discussions were held. The first one focused on Azerbaijan-Africa relations, exploring current cooperation and future strategic opportunities with participation from ambassadors, Azerbaijani diplomats and members of parliament.
Azerbaijan-Africa relations is constantly growing. Now we have diplomatic relations with almost all African countries except one and Central African Republic, and we are working on concluding a memorandum of understanding, establishing diplomatic relations with this country as well. This September we are going to finalize it. Of course, there is still untapped potential that we can explore further in the cooperation between Azerbaijan and Africa.
We want to affirm that indeed we find Azerbaijan to be a very significant partner. The potential we see are in areas of cooperation relating to energy. As you know, sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing shortages and challenges with energy distribution, energy production.
Dear students, and now please...
Participants were also introduced to ASAN Services International Cooperation Initiatives in Africa, highlighting its expanding engagement on the continent. The second panel examined Africa's role in the evolving global system, focused on Agenda 2063 and long-term development priorities. The conference underscored growing political dialogue and expanding cooperation between Azerbaijan and African nations. Gülçin Hocalayeva, Natik Mehmedov, A News.
Iran says 20 airports across the country have resumed operations following the war, according to the Civil Aviation Organization. Officials say the reopened airports now account for about 40% of Iran's total airport network. Authorities also announced that Tabriz International Airport is expected to resume operations within the next week, with flights planned to 9 destinations, including Istanbul, Baghdad, Dubai, Baku and Hamburg. Iran currently has 57 active civilian airports, including 14 international hubs, handling an average of 30 million passengers annually. Iran confirmed it's in the process of finalizing a memorandum of understanding with the United States, mediated by Pakistan, insisting that an end to war, releasing Iran's frozen assets and removal of maritime blockade are key clauses in Tehran's 14-point proposal to reach a peace deal. Our correspondent Turaj Shiralilo reports from Tehran.
Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai has confirmed that Tehran and Washington are adding the finishing touches to an interim peace deal, while the mediated exchange of proposals and counter-proposals are inching slowly despite a burst of diplomatic optimism. According to the state-owned IRNA news agency, the spokesman announced that there are a number of stumbling blocks in the ongoing peace process mediated by Pakistan. Notably, Tehran's demanding complete end to hostilities, as well as releasing its frozen assets. He added that lifting the maritime blockade over Iran's southern ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman stands out in Iran's conditions to sign what he termed a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Meantime, the Revolutionary Guards (IRGC) announced that it allowed 33 vessels to sail across the Strait of Hormuz in one day, as there has been an increase in the number of ships transiting the narrow strategic waterway since last week. In a statement on Sunday, it said that over the past 24 hours, 33 vessels, including oil tankers, container ships, and other commercial vessels, passed through the Strait of Hormuz after obtaining permits and with the coordination of the IRGC Navy. In another development, Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal Affairs Kazem Garibabadi met the Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi in Muscat on Sunday and conveyed him the verbal message of the Iranian Foreign Minister. According to a post on the senior Iranian diplomat's X account, he also held a meeting in Oman to review a set of principles governing the passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, while respecting the security and national sovereignty of the coastal states of the Strait and in light of applicable rules of international law. Over the weekend, Foreign Minister Abbas Araqchi held phone calls with the UN chief, Iraqi Kurdistan president, and his counterparts from Qatar for 2 times, Iraq, Turkey, Oman, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said in its statements that the talks focused on the latest diplomatic developments in the region aimed at preventing an escalation of tension and ending the war imposed by the U.S. and Israel against Iran. Turaj Shiralilo, reporting from downtown Tehran for A News.
Turkey says it's ready to support the implementation of a potential agreement involving Iran and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The comments came during a series of weekend calls between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and U.S. President Donald Trump, and also regional leaders, amid renewed speculation over a possible diplomatic breakthrough with Tehran. Our correspondent Adam Morrow reports.
Ankara is signaling that it wants to play a constructive role in any potential diplomatic arrangement involving Iran, particularly one that could help secure maritime stability in the Gulf and ease pressure on global energy markets. According to the Turkish presidency, President Erdogan told Donald Trump and regional leaders over the weekend that guaranteeing free passage through the Strait of Hormuz would contribute to regional stability and provide relief to the global economy. The comments came after Trump announced Saturday that a largely negotiated memorandum of understanding linked to an Iran peace deal would lead to the reopening of the strategically vital waterway. Iranian state media, however, later disputed that characterization, creating uncertainty over how close any agreement may actually be. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical energy choke points, with roughly a fifth of globally traded oil passing through the narrow corridor linking the Persian Gulf to international markets. Any disruption of the waterway has immediate implications for oil prices, shipping costs, and broader economic stability. Turkey, which imports significant volumes of energy and sits at the crossroads of regional trade routes, has consistently pushed for de-escalation in the Gulf and diplomatic solutions to regional crises. Ankara's latest remarks suggest it is positioning itself as a possible mediator or facilitating actor if negotiations between Iran and the United States move forward. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Rustem Umerov in Ankara on Sunday. The meeting took place in the Turkish capital as part of ongoing talks between Turkey and Ukraine. Fidan and Umerov held talks following a photo session. The Sunday meeting follows recent high-level contacts between Turkish and Ukrainian officials, though authorities declined to provide additional details about the specific agenda or duration of discussions between Fidan and Umerov. A deadly explosion has struck a railway line in Pakistan, leaving at least 24 people dead and dozens injured. This comes as the Baloch Liberation Army claims responsibility for what authorities say was a suicide blast.
At least 24 people have been killed and around 70 others injured in Pakistan after a bomb blast struck a shuttle carrying security personnel and their families in southwestern Balochistan province on Sunday. The Baloch Liberation Army, a militant group that demands independence from Pakistan's central government, has claimed responsibility for the attack. Authorities say the death toll may rise further as search and rescue operations continue. Witnesses described the moment of the explosion, which police say was a suicide blast.
I was right there near the tracks. I can't even believe how we survived. It was right there, just a few steps away, right in front of us. Only a few steps. The blast was so huge. Thank God we made it out alive.
In a social media post, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned the attack, calling it cowardly and saying it would not weaken the Pakistani people. Pakistan's oil and mineral-rich Balochistan province has long experienced bouts of violence from separatist groups. The BLA has previously claimed responsibility for large-scale bombings and suicide attacks in the region.
Millions of people in Afghanistan remain in urgent need of humanitarian support, according to the United Nations. A new report also warns that large-scale returns from Pakistan and Iran are putting further pressure on already struggling communities. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The humanitarian situation in Afghanistan remains deeply worrying. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says 21.9 million people needed humanitarian assistance in the first 3 months of 2026. But despite plans to reach 17.5 million people, aid agencies were only able to assist 4.7 million. That is just around 27% of the people targeted. The biggest challenge appears to be funding. OCHA says $1.7 billion were required for the humanitarian response, but only $195 million has so far been secured. This huge funding gap means millions of vulnerable families are still without full support. The report says children made up almost half of those who received assistance at 49%. At the same time, the UN response plan shows Afghanistan is also dealing with a growing returnee crisis. It says around 5.8 million Afghans have returned since September 2023, and a further 2.69 million are projected to return from Pakistan and Iran between April and December this year. Aid agencies say more funding is urgently needed for emergency border help and longer-term support, warning that without it, Afghanistan's fragile communities will face even greater pressure. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Thousands of Muslim pilgrims performed tawaf at Mecca's Grand Mosque on Sunday ahead of the start of Hajj. Hajj is the annual Islamic pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, bringing together millions of Muslims from around the world. As one of the 5 pillars of Islam, it's a once-in-a-lifetime religious obligation for every Muslim who is physically and financially able to perform it. The pilgrimage follows the Islamic lunar calendar, meaning its dates shift each year across different seasons. Trump Mobile has put the spotlight back on its T1 phone announced last year, saying shipments to customers will begin soon. However, analysts say the device resembles one made by HTC. Here is more with A News' Nathan Garma with that story and more on Switch.
In 2026, I'm pretty sure there are 2 essentials to our everyday lives. The first is a mobile phone, and the second, a mobile phone. So when a company promises a phone sporting a 6.8-inch AMOLED screen, a 50-megapixel main camera, oh, and did I mention it comes in a gold color? Wouldn't you be down to buy one? It's called the T1 phone by Trump Mobile. The $499 device was announced last year, but has recently resurfaced in the spotlight as the company began sending out review units ahead of customer shipments. But just before you shell out your hard-earned cash on the Android device, take a look at this other phone released in 2024. It's called the HTC U24 Pro, and I would like to play a small game of Spot the Difference. Here's the T1. Now here's the U24. T1. U24. T1. U24. So clearly someone copied someone else's homework. They just did it with golden ink. Now, we've all heard about AI taking over our jobs, but whoever thought builders were at risk? This is Walter, and it's described as a wall-laying Terra-based robot. Its developers say it can do the work of 5 bricklayers and 1 laborer in 1 hour, though they say it's more of a help than an actual replacement. Developed in the Czech Republic by KM Robotics, Walter uses special bricks which have grooves to allow the machine to grip, lift, and place each unit. The robot is currently being used in England, but will be rolled out to other sites in due course. I just wish Walter put on a hard hat, for safety. And now for some big news in AI, Google has just announced a new AI model called Gemini Omni. The company claims the model can convert text and static images into animated videos using multimodal AI techniques, helping you to create, quote, anything. So I decided to give it a try. I borrowed my good friend Cameron, uploaded his photo, and asked the model to turn him into a detective from a 1930s noir film. And voila! Cinematic perfection within seconds. This model just shows how tech companies are pushing to offer more realistic and faster production models in an attempt to capture the AI-powered visual content market. So give Omni a shot and, I don't know, turn yourself into that celebrity you've always dreamed of becoming. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to catch up with us for more tech news and insights on the next show.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay with us.